Hi all, and welcome to today's lockdown COVID activity, which is our fibroid safari, where you're going to learn about what kinds of fibroids they are and what kind of symptoms they can cause. They're they tend to cluster into herds of types of symptoms, but there is a lot of crossover. So let's get started. Starting our Jeep. Vroom, vroom, vroom. Oh yes, feel that shudder. We're in the African savannah. Please look at the beautiful backdrop and the African sunrise when you get to see it. Oh, and there's our first herd of fibroids. Let's have a look and see what these are going to do. So these little tiny ones here, these little intramural ones, which are hibernating squirrels, are not going to cause any symptoms at all. This one here is quite small, so it might not be doing anything yet, but if it were, it would be causing heavier menstrual bleeding because of the increased surface area. This one is probably not going to be causing symptoms yet, intramural, but there might be some slight pressure symptoms, for example, urinary frequency. But this fibroid is probably going to get bigger, in which case you'll see what it would end up like later on. So amazing that we got to see 3 of these rare creatures all together. Actually, they're not rare, they're so common. Fibroids are so common. Oh, and here's another cluster of fibroids. Let's have a look and see what they could cause. So these red fibroids are, you can see the uterus here is clearly enlarged. Here it is enlarged, but not to the same extent. What we're seeing is submucosal fibroids, right? And what do submucosal fibroids do, and why are the ears red? They bleed. So these increase the surface area of the endometrium, and so the bleeding is heavier. It is still, however, regular, and it follows the normal cycle. This one with a more enlarged uterus is going to start feeling some pressure symptoms, which we will discuss soon. Okay, thank you. What a privilege to see those out in the wild. And now, now we can see the yellow cluster of fibroids, which are responsible for infertility. So here we have a big cervical fibroid. And what that can do, in fact, I'm just going to move his ears up just a little bit so you can see. In fact, I'm going to take that one off. So you can see more clearly. There's the cervical canal and there's the endometrium. This cervical fibroid can compress the endocervical canal, preventing sperm coming up. So that's how this one can cause infertility. This is also probably going to cause some dyspareunia and some pressure symptoms, either rectal or bladder, depending whether this is anterior or posterior. Not quite sure, it's not labeled. Other ways that fibroids can cause infertility is that they can block the uterine ostia, so the egg cannot come down. Okay, then here we have a very sad example of how fibroids can cause infertility. There is a placenta that has implanted directly over the fibroid, so that is not normal tissue, and this tissue cannot sustain the nutrition that a placenta needs to give to the fetus. So that is one manifestation of infertility, which is recurrent miscarriages. So you can either have inability to conceive completely or recurrent miscarriages. These fibroids during pregnancy are likely to enlarge under the influence of progesterone, and they can undergo red degeneration, which is, remember, when you've got a gravid uterus that's compressing the flow, the return of the inferior vena cava, and that blood, instead of getting to the heart where it's supposed to be, becomes extravasated into fibroid, and that's incredibly painful, and it happens only during pregnancy. Okay, now we are moving on. Let's see what else we can see on our magical early morning safari. Oh, and my battery is telling me I've got low power, but that's fine. We will finish. Here we find some truly massive specimens in the wild. Both of these uteruses are huge. So these are going to definitely cause pressure symptoms, which is your urinary frequency, constipation. They're big enough that they might be causing, especially this one, might be causing compression of the nerves in the pelvic floor. Both of these women are going to definitely feel some kind of a pelvic heaviness, and they'll probably be aware of this mass because this is going to protrude well out of the pelvic brim. you can clearly see that this is going to be a problem in terms of fertility. These women are not going to be able to conceive. If you look very closely here, there's a bit of darker tissue there, so there might have been a little bit of torsion and necrosis there, but I'm going to show you a better example of that. If that were the case, it would be incredibly painful. So these are going to cause a dull ache, a feeling of pressure, but not an acute severe pain. Okay, I hope you've taken your photographs of these magnificent animals. And we're moving on to our final destination for the day. These two, this subcluster of fibroid beasts can be responsible for pain. So this is now a massive subserosal fibroid. It's also going to contribute to all those pressure symptoms we spoke of. The woman is also going to be aware that there's a mass in her abdomen. Infertility also is going to be an issue. But I wanted to show you this one because it is so huge. What can happen is that the blood supply to the center, this can easily outgrow now its blood supply, and then it can undergo avascular necrosis towards the center, which causes incredible pain. Necrosis, black, death tissue. Okay, and here we've got a leaking specimen, but never mind that. We have got a fibroid here, which was pedunculated, and it obviously underwent torsion and necrosis. That would have caused severe acute lower abdominal pain. And this uterus is also quite big, so she probably would have felt some pressure symptoms leading up to that. Also remember that before this undergoes torsion, it is actually submucosal, so it also contributes to the surface area for the endometrium to shed from. So she probably would have had heavy menstrual bleeding before. So you can see that when there's a submucosal one, there's heavy menstrual bleeding. When there's a subserosal one, you're more likely to have the pressure symptoms, but you're not going to have the bleeding because it's not protruding into where the endometrium is. Thank you so much for joining us for today's wonderful African safari, and please stay tuned for the rest of the fibroid lessons in Vula.